My journey really began in the US studying at Harvard University. Coming from India, we are all storytellers, right? Like we grew up in an environment where stories are an essential part of our upbringing and our culture. It happened in a way where essentially during social hours, I would meet people from like different parts of the world and they would have their interesting stories. And naturally, as a result of that, I would share some of my stories. Podcasting has evolved a lot. Just go out and tell everyone. I don't care if you have to grab people from street and say that like this is the QR code to my podcast, please subscribe or please listen. That's fine. Do it. Like, be absolute besharam when it comes to promoting your work and yourself. And you'll be surprised how many people will sign up for that. That's a sign of confidence.
How do you create your viewership that is loyal to your channel in this day and age? Like, can you shed some light on that?
Sometimes thinking of it from an angle that is not mainstream might become the idea that differentiates. Having an interesting spin on idea is really important. And it's a podcast, let's say, that just talks about medieval age businesses. 5,000 years ago, I had no idea how did they do sales or accounting, the old primitive form. So always think of like either combining two ideas or having like an anti-mainstream spin on it. So that's one way to stand out. And the other way is also to distribute.
So how do you make the podcast financially sustainable? Like there are a lot of podcasts moving, but how do you earn from the podcast? Like what is your take on it?
If you want to actually make money out of it, you have to think of it in a broader context. It's like for which company would it solve a problem of reaching a certain set of customers, potential customers for them, and how could they have access to that through yours? So it's thinking from that lens.
Podcasting right now is, I think, around $500 million in India itself, and it has a CAGR of 33% in India, and it's estimated to touch around $4 billion by 2033.
So AI definitely is going to influence the whole universe of podcasting in very significant way.
Hi guys, welcome to another Healthy Naaris Podcast. Today we have something different for you all. We're starting with an online podcast and we have a very special guest lined up for you. So he's Aalok. He comes from the background, the world of podcasting. So we'll have a lot of interesting questions for him and understand more about the world of podcasting. He is also has his own production company. So we'll be covering a bit of that also. Hi Aalok, welcome to Healthy Naaris Podcast. So happy to have you here.
Pleasure to be here.
Look, you've known many paths, like being an entrepreneur, film producer, podcast creator. So can you take us through that journey and how podcasting became a part of it?
Sure. So my journey really began in the US when I was studying at Harvard University. And coming from India, we are all storytellers, right? Like we grew up in an environment where stories are an essential part of our upbringing and our culture. And it happened in a way where essentially during social hours, I would meet people from like different parts of the world and they would have their interesting stories. And naturally, as a result of that, I would share some of my stories. And it became this great cultural exchange where people would talk about how things happen in their side of the world, and just gave rise to this idea that we all have like such amazing and wonderful stories. And so some of my stories sort of traveled around the campus and it caught an attention of a friend who said that like, hey, I've heard you have some interesting stories, you have a real knack for good storytelling, why don't you consider film production? And at that time, I was just a student. I'm like, I don't know anything about film production. Like, what will I do with that? But she's like, no, I already have an idea. I have a script, I have a crew. You just have to write a check and like, I'll take care of it. You get to be on the film set, take picture with the actors. And, if film does well, you can walk the red carpet. And I'm like, but that sounds nice. Well, like, I would want to walk down the red carpet. So I started working with her and essentially just wrote a check, right? And that was the beginning of my company called Ansia Productions, where essentially we started then producing short films as a way to sort of pitch those concepts to bigger studios and other producers. And that is something what was the initial genesis of the storytelling that we did. But because film production takes time, you have to script, you have to edit, you have to shoot all of that, right? Between two productions of the film, I wanted to do something that keeps me creatively occupied. And I started thinking, okay, what is it that I could do that doesn't take a lot of energy and preparation, and money, and it would be fun thing to do. So I thought, okay, I'll just ask my questions, like some of the business related questions, career related questions, to my classmates and friends. So it started with that. I was wrong about the amount of preparation and timing and planning that it takes, but it grew on itself, where it became this fun activity where, like, oh, I have seen the fun side of my friends. Let's see what's like the business side and like the serious side of them. So it started with that, and I enjoyed the process so much that essentially I started doing that thing between films. And before we knew, I had six podcasts and almost 280 episodes, and
Wow.
that's been my journey in a nutshell.
So from business to storytelling to podcast, like what gave you that creative drive to go about this, and what is with podcasting that you love so much?
I think already had that creative spark in me. It's just that I never had an outlet to express that, right? So, like growing up in India, there's always this idea
Yeah.
that become an engineer, doctor, lawyer, do something where you have stable income and things like that, which was surprising because I come from a business family, right? And so to hear that from my parents saying that yes, we did business but you need to do a job, seemed a bit counterintuitive. But once I was in the US and I was surrounded by these people, this sort of creative spark in me came out. And what I loved about podcasting specifically is that because I started with my friends and people that I know on some level, they didn't mind being open about certain things in life, which otherwise they wouldn't be, right? So, like talking about uh, the challenges they faced in building their business, or like, some of the insecurities about how they are perceived in the business world, and of course, the good things about how they build the business and everything. So, I think it's just it was a very candid nature of it, where people wouldn't mind talking about things that would otherwise, like, they would be very skeptical about. So that's what really appealed to me, and that's what I love about long form podcasting, is that even if you're pretending, no matter how great an actor you are, you won't be able to sustain that beyond, like, 30-40 minutes. Like at some point, the real you will come through. So that's what really appealed to me.
So, hello. So someone who's starting podcast now, what do you think? Like, what are the key three things that the person should focus on, like from day one?
Hmm. Uh, so I would say that podcasting has evolved a lot. Given, like, when I started in 2016, uh, we used to have an app called Anchor, which essentially you would record your podcast on, and that was meant only for audio podcasting, right? And it was so interesting because, like, I would be in the basement of a friend's house in a corner trying to make sure that there is no echo. And then, sometimes it loses connection, so there is like overlap in recording, and it was a very different thing back then, right? But now, with the advent of technology and AI, you have a lot of resources to kickstart your podcasting journey. So the first thing I would say is that don't worry too much about the technical side of it. Like, even at the base level, you have good technologies now that with a decent internet connection, you'll be able to record good quality audio. So don't worry too much about the tech side of it. You can just start, because that's where, like, I feel a lot of people get caught up. It's like, oh, I need to have this mic, I need to have this studio, I need to have like this kind of editing. Don't worry too much about it. It's important to have some structure to your recordings and your episode, but don't like overthink it, especially when you're starting. Second thing is that make sure whatever format you choose, you stick to it, right? So if it's a storytelling podcast where you're narrating something, whether it's interview podcast where you're talking to people, or whether it's like some highly produced audio drama, or like, fiction storytelling that you're doing, just stick to that, because it takes a while for not only you to become comfortable with the format, but also your audience, when they understand that, oh, if this guy is doing interview, then like, oh, he or she is really good at it, right? Because with time they are able to see your growth. Or if you are doing something that is storytelling based or narrative based, your instincts will sharpen with time, and you will be able to become more creative about it. And then the third thing is that just go out and tell everyone. I don't care if you have to grab people from street and say that like, hey, this is the QR code to my podcast, please subscribe or please listen. That's fine, do it. Like, be absolute besharam when it comes to promoting your work and yourself. And you'll be surprised how many people will sign up for that, because that's a sign of confidence, and they're like, okay, well, it seems like this person is really enthusiastic and charged up about their work, so let me replicate that. So I would say these are the three things that you should keep in mind when you're starting out.
I think great. Yeah, we are lacking on the third part, I feel.
So there are so many technological innovations, as well as there's so much of different kind of podcasts and features and genres, and people are taking this branch of media and communication very seriously. So as a novice, how do you stand out, or how do you create your cult following, or how do you create your viewership that is loyal to your channel in this day and age? Like, can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I would say that because there are a lot of podcasts and it's getting a really crowded space now, with like, everyone having their own podcast, which is a good thing in a certain way. But yes, I agree. It also presents a challenge in terms of standing out. So I would say, first of all, if you want to differentiate yourself, that has to happen either on an idea level or on an execution level. So I'll give you an example, right?
Yeah.
We were thinking of an idea of like, okay, what would be a good podcast to do beyond the business segment that we did, right? Like, so we had a careers podcast, business podcast, where essentially people would talk about their career journeys, which is fun, which is great, did like still is very recognized in the professional world. But we are like, okay, there is a whole audience that doesn't tune into podcasts for that. They want to talk about like relationships and like, personal life and all of that. So like Modern Love by New York Times is a great example of that podcast. We are like, let's do something similar to that. And but we just felt like everyone talks about love, प्यार की बातें तो सब करते हैं, right? Let's just talk about breakups then, like, because nobody talks about that, right? So we decided to come up with an idea called My Crazy Breakup, where we just talk to people. They're like, hey, what's the craziest breakup you've had, right? And people just go on like an hour long rant about like how this was the worst person that they met, and they destroyed their life, and they wish that they never met them. And a lot of crazy details would emerge out of it, right? Like, oh, I stole his dog, or like I maxed out his credit cards, or like slashed his tires and broke his windshield. So it would get like very interesting, very crazy, sometimes even scary. It's like, oh wow, I didn't realize you would be like this in a relationship. So that was a great angle, and that just people tuned in. They are like, nee, if you have gone through breakup, then I want to know what caused it, right? It's just this, the voyeuristic nature of it. So that is something that like really stood out, right? So sometimes thinking of it from an angle that is not mainstream might become the idea that differentiates you. So when everyone is talking about love, talk about breakups, right? So having an interesting spin on idea is really important. The other way to also stand out is like combining two different areas, right? So you can talk about like history and business, and if you combine that, and it's a podcast, let's say, that just talks about like, medieval age businesses, that's an interesting angle, because everyone understands business, but it's like, okay, 5,000 years ago I had no idea how did they do sales or accounting, right? But it still used to happen in some form, the old primitive form. So that might be an interesting thing. So always think of like either combining two ideas or having like an anti mainstream spin on it. So that's one way to stand out. And the other way is also to sort of like to distribute it. So you can like, again, be very shameless about it and go to businesses and people and just talk about like, oh hey, would you mind wearing this t-shirt where it has a giant QR code on the back, and just ask your friends and other people to do it, and it grows very quickly. So I think distribution can become again a challenge when people are like, okay, we have created great show but nobody's listening. So it's like, okay, just you can make content out of it, like where in Mumbai you could go to Marine Drive or like some place in Bandra and just like stand with a QR code, people will just naturally come and talk to you. It's like, hey, what's this QR code? And that's its own content, but it's also getting you more viewership. So yeah, those are some ideas, I guess, that you could use, and that I think is like, would be helpful for people starting out.
But how do you make the podcast financially sustainable? Like there are a lot of podcasts moving, but how do you earn from the podcast? Like what is your take on it?
So podcasting generally, has two revenue streams, right? So one is of course the subscription that you would earn from, like, being on a certain platform, and the second is the ad partnerships, right? So you can work with companies to have like a pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll, price it at a certain level, and then you agree with them to run your ads for a certain point in exchange of a certain money. So I would say one way to do that is, like, if you want to also make money out of it beyond the creative standpoint, is to keep in mind like some of the brands for whom this would be a great fit to advertise, right? So if you're talking about business and if there is a company that makes an accounting software, that's a great partnership, right? If you are talking about breakups, but then if there is a dating app, that's an interesting spin. They're like, hey, you just went through a breakup, but like if you are on this app, you would not have to worry about that. So that's an important element to consider when you're planning your podcast, is that okay, if you want to actually make money out of it, you have to think of it in a broader context. Is like, for which company would it solve a problem of reaching a certain set of customers, potential customers for them, and how could they have access to that through your show, right? So it's thinking from that lens, and that really makes you stand out, because most people start their podcast thinking, oh, I'll just keep doing it, I'll be consistent, I'll build my audience, and then brands will come. And that could be a challenging thing, because by then you have very loyal listeners, but they are not good potential customers for a brand. But if you flip it the other way, it's like, okay, which business could earn new customers through my podcast? Then it gives you a lot more leverage in the marketplace, and you could actually go and negotiate and have a really good partnership based on that. And I've seen some creators who just have that out of, like, at the front and center of their mind, and they end up making like really good deals even with very very small focused listenership. They are able to get really good deals with certain brands, because they are like, okay, if it's a women's health podcast, they have like 100 brands they could partner with, right? So even if it is for like 3 weeks that they could partner with them and let's say make like $1,000, that's still, you have there, you have so many companies, and with one company you can say that, hey, we already partnered with this company, they loved the results, we would love to work with you as well. So it creates this loop where you just need like one company to partner with you on a small level, and then you can just build on that. So I would say, if you want to make money from your podcast, that should be at the core of your creative strategy as well, where like, what is, like, the kind of audience that we want to tap into, and which brand would it relate to.
Right, yeah.
So interesting. So basically now podcast is booming, but monetization, everybody can't achieve it. Like, some have a longer journey, some achieve it fast. What do you think makes podcasting financially sustainable? And can you walk us through your personal podcasting business model that worked for you?
Yeah, sure. So monetization is a result of not only having a solid infrastructure where you have enough people listening to podcasts, but then also enough brands and companies willing to advertise on that, right? And so my experience of like working in the podcasting industry in the US was such, where like a lot of tech platforms in the initial days used to play that middleman, where essentially they would work with companies and say that, like, hey, we have all this podcast on our platform and we know which ones are growing and which ones are not. So why don't you partner with them? And then, essentially we make some money, the podcaster gets their revenue, you get your reach with the audience, right? The brands, some of whom will go on to become customers. So essentially you need a platform, or some sort of infrastructure where the buyer and the seller, in this case like the podcaster and the brands, can seamlessly connect, at least have visibility. They can connect perhaps, let's say, somewhere else, but at bare minimum there has to be some visibility into which platforms, like which podcasts are doing well on which platforms, right? And sometimes that is not as easy as going to like Apple Podcast Analytics dashboard or Google Podcast Analytics dashboard and just looking at the data. Sometimes it needs more nuance. So in my scenario, in my journey, what I have seen, um, at least works in the US, and then like I'm seeing like a lot more of these trends emerge in India as well, is this idea of branded podcast, right? So the thing is that when we started we were just doing it for fun, right? But then clearly we were having challenges with monetization. Initially we did find some brands who were willing to partner with us, and that was great. But then after a point you have to create some sort of system where you can have that sustained money coming in, right? And so we just spoke to certain brands and realized that the reason they partner with certain podcasts is that they don't know how to do their own podcasts, right? So they are like, we have to find a podcast that somewhat matches the kind of idea that our brand is, and that way that's like the closest match we could find, so we partner with them, right? So I'm like, okay, well, if that's the case, how about I make you your own podcast, right? That is completely geared with like your story, your brand, your messaging, and reflects your values. And essentially that way not only you can reach your internal customers, which are your employees, but also external ones. And it was a wild idea because it's like, okay, you know when you don't have a huge team and you are making such big promises, it's a bit scary. It's like, okay, you can do that, but you don't have a team here. Like, what do you mean? It's like, no, I have people in India, they'll figure it out, don't worry. So it started with that, and then I started working with certain early stage startups in New Jersey, and they were like, okay, this is how we want it to be done, right? And that essentially became a business model where, like, okay, you create your own podcast, right? And I'm talking more on a corporate level, someone who wants to make this as like their full-time thing, right? Where you do your own podcast and make sure that it's good enough quality wise and content wise, so that it ranks in like the top charts at Apple Podcasts and like all these other uh, podcast charts. Use that as a proof of concept and then pitch to like other individuals or companies, saying that, like, hey, I know how to do podcasts, here's the public proof of it. You can see that we have been like chart toppers for all these weeks, right? And then tell them that if I could do that for myself, I could also do that for your brand. So let's talk, let's discuss what is it that you're trying to convey through your story and your messaging. And then it starts from that. And then of course companies, because they have huge marketing budgets, even the mid-sized companies have decent budgets, right? They will be able to pay you a lot more on an episode basis or a season basis, right? And then you just rinse and repeat, right?
Yeah.
um, so that I would say would be like the dominant business model from a financial standpoint going forward, because that's already proven concept in the US. And so India would sort of also want to do that. It's like, okay, a lot of podcasters would be so good at what they do that they could work with companies in that particular industry to help them create their own podcast, either like, logistically, like doing it end to end, or even just creatively, where they are like, okay, we can be the creative mind behind this, but like some production company, podcast production company can do it, right? So I think there will be a lot more of that happening. So that's what people should look out if they want to build a business as such out of it. Then that's the model to go.
So, what is like if you take a chart or a pie, where do you get the most amount of money from? Is it ad sponsorships, subscriptions, or IP licensing? Where do you think is the most lucrative opportunity if someone is starting their podcast business?
I would say on your own, it's just the subscription revenue that you would get based on like the reach of your podcast, right? Uh, Different platforms have different ways, like based on downloads, listens, plays, jo bhi bol do. But yeah, I think if you are willing to put a little bit more effort, right, you would make a lot more with that same amount of content that you have created with ad sponsorships. So sometimes ads, like brands don't know that your podcast exists, but once they become aware of that, they would be willing to partner with you and pay you a good amount of money, right? And so I think it helps to just like, start with initial list of like 10, 15 companies that you would think this would make a good partnership for. Just reach out to them, like people who work in brand or marketing or PR areas of their company. Just reach out to them, hit them up on LinkedIn, and like make a good case for you, saying like, hey, I have this podcast, would love to partner with you, and here's the link to listen all to all the episodes, right? And you'd be surprised how many brands would be willing to join hands with you, and that becomes a good partnership. But yeah, if you can do that, that's just like the amount of effort to the amount of money that you make is like such a great differential, is that like you would feel like, okay, subscription money on its own is great, it's coming, right? But let me just like hit people up on LinkedIn and just see where it goes. So I think, yeah, relative to effort, that will make you a lot more money than just like trying to hustle and like doubling down on things on your podcast.
Keep in mind while pitching to the sponsors or platform?
uh I would say, so there are three things, right? I would say is like something that should like jump out of your outreach, no matter whether you're doing it to brand, individuals, platforms. First is of course like very clear messaging. Like you have to do sort of a bit of homework for them to say that this is the reason why we are a good match, right? So if I, let's say, make a podcast that is based on immigrants, for example, right, in the US, like everyone who came from everywhere else in the US, that like family owned small businesses are the people that will pay you for that. So then you can work with that and say that, okay, if this corner sandwich shop is run by like group of Indians in the US, you can go and talk to them like, hey, this is our podcast that focuses on immigrants, and running your ad on that is like a great match, because then it's like, okay, we're talking about immigrants and their challenges and how they succeed in the US, and you are an example of that. So not only you will get people who will come to your store, but then your story will also be heard by a lot more people in general, as a concept as well, right? So that you have to understand that, okay, brands, because they have money, they have options to approach anyone, right? Beyond the traditional like the ad spend that they do. But if you want to get some of it, then you have to do that little bit of homework, is like why it's a good partnership. Second, always pitch something for the long term. Don't say that कि हाँ मतलब we'll run this ad for a week or like 2 months या ऐसा कुछ. Try to think in terms of like, okay, how could this be an ongoing partnership? So always bake this idea into the messaging, is that like we would love to partner every time there is like a product launch or like a key initiative that you are planning, and we could be like an important part of that messaging to the audience, right? And then the third thing is just like have fun. I think if you're having fun, then you would have that motivation to keep doing things, because I think a lot of people expect like quick results, or they have like certain uh, you know uh, uh, financial goal in mind through their podcasting, and all that is great. But I think podcasting is such an industry, and I mean like any content related industry is that thing where you would get compound returns, where like for first few years you won't see anything, but then suddenly after a point, if you've been consistent, then you will become a household name, right? And so a lot of people tap out along the way, and for like good reasons, because it's an intensive process. But if you just stick to it, then eventually things will come, right? Like platforms are evolving, brands are evolving, audience is evolving. So you will find your tribe, your people, your community eventually. Once you have that, then you have so much leverage, not only in terms of the reach of your content, but also the negotiating power with brands. So always keep that in mind, that do it however you want, right? Do it without editing, do it without marketing, do it from your bed, do it from your car, जो भी है, ठीक है. Just keep producing content, whatever it is that makes you, gives you fun, right? Uh, and yeah, eventually people will see, they will come along, and before you know, you would have your community. So yeah, it's important to do that. Like, a lot of brands might not listen to your pitch or consider your idea first time, right? You do it for the seventh time and they'll be like, okay, there is something here, let me listen to it, right? And people might think, 7 times, like, we are bothering them, they might give us a rude response, whatever, right? And these are all valid concerns, but I'm like, if you just keep doing it, right, eventually it will all be compensated, both in terms of, like, money and the kind of uh, recognition you will get for your work. So yeah, just have fun and keep at it.
So podcasting right now is, I think, around $500 million in India itself, and it has a CAGR of 33% in India, and it's estimated to touch around $4 billion in 2033. Why do you think this medium has taken off currently, and why the fascination with podcasting as a content or as an entertainment perspective? A lot of brands are jumping into podcasting as a way to reach an audience. One of the reasons why we also started this. So, why do you think that is?
I would say, so there are certain key reasons why podcasting has really taken off, right? Like, so first of all, because it's a new media format, right? Where it's like, okay, it's sort of like radio, but it's on demand. And I mean, in this day and age, podcasting is not just a podcast, right? Like, it's a YouTube channel. So it's a way for people to not only like, express themselves and their personality and their ideas and their expertise, but it also sort of amplifies that when you bring other people in the fold, right? So largely in India, I would say majority of the podcasting market is just like interview based, whether it's on YouTube or audio, however you look at it. Largely, that's what people are doing, and very small portion of it is where you have, like, audio narrative, or, like, create like fiction storytelling through audio, right? So in that sense, I think, first of all, it's the advent of also a new generation, where, like, you get to see younger generation, younger people, or people who are more tech savvy, take that up and then have conversations in the long form format that would otherwise be difficult or expensive to do it on TV, or like on a dedicated YouTube channel, right? So, like, podcasting becomes that great middle ground where, like, okay, you can have decent production value, but then you can talk about important ideas for long. So from an ad standpoint, because it's a new format, there is a novelty factor, so brands are jumping onto it, knowing that, okay, that's a great way for us to differentiate, because TV ads are expensive and they are static, wo aake chale jate, right? Billboards people might see or not see. Online marketing is now getting more expensive and very fragmented, right? So then they are like, okay, what's one way that, like, you can reach people organically, at least semi organically? So podcast becomes that great middle ground where, like, okay, you have, like, people engaging and tuned into it. At the same time, it's a good opportunity for us to tap into a market where we can reach younger generation, right? Because otherwise, uh, that's one of the key reasons why it really grew in the US, because people thought that, traditional forms of advertising only reached people who are slightly older and have good spending power. But then if you want to reach people who are, like, in the college or, like, early in the career, then you have to tune into the podcast, because that's what they are listening. So it also becomes a research tool for a lot of companies to understand that, okay, what is younger generation listening to, what are they consuming, where are they spending money, right? So because a new generation consumes this podcast format for its authenticity and long form format, it became a good sort of way for people to connect with each other, and then brands recognize the value of that. And so these are some of the reasons why I feel that it stands out as a medium, and it's just going to continue to grow. So as you said, the CAGR 33%, it's going to stick around that for another 7 to 10 years.
So, is your podcast producer like any? person taking it.
So can you repeat that question?
I'm saying, what is your like one of the most memorable as a podcast producer?
Sorry, I'm not able to
Yeah,
listen.
there's some glitch. Sonal, ask the question. Okay.
Yeah. So Alok, what is your most memorable moment as a podcast producer?
Uh, as a podcast producer, I would say one of the most memorable moment I had um, was there are so many actually. Let me think of it. Um, yeah, I think one of the most memorable moment I had as a producer. We I produced a show called Love Without Borders, which again, so to give you some context, like once we started having fun with like this breakup podcast, we felt like okay, we want to do more of relationship stuff, right? And so we felt like okay, breakup is done, now what else can we do? So we felt like okay, we already spoken about breakup, let's talk about like successful happy couples who have like really good journeys of like being with each other. So a Gujarati girl falls in love with a Mexican guy because they met at a university and they both spoke Spanish and did salsa, and now they are like married and living together. And it's the whole journey of like how it was so challenging given their different cultures, but somehow they made it work, right? And so that evokes hope in people. It's like okay, true love does exist, and these are the stories of that. And we would love to tune into that because it feels good that okay, eventually people are together and they fell in love. And I think that was a very profound moment from this specific episode where again this Gujarati girl fell in love with a Mexican guy. And as they were talking about their journey in the episode, the guy said the Mexican guy said that because the girl's parents don't speak anything except Gujarati, like little bit of broken English, but largely Gujarati. This guy actually took night lessons to learn Gujarati so that he could speak to his in-laws, right? And that was a moment that really blew me away. It's like, okay, not only you guys worked through whatever cultural differences you had and then like convinced your families and had this amazing wedding, but you are learning a whole new language to speak to your in-laws. Like you have your wife now, right? She can communicate that, but he's like no, it's important to connect with in-laws. And like they created this person that I fell in love with. So it's important for me to connect with them on a level that they understand. Now it's impractical for them to learn Spanish. It's like a child just learn Gujarati. And when I spoke to him in Gujarati, because I'm Gujarati, right? And I tell you, I kid you not, I couldn't make out whether this is a Gujarati person speaking or a Mexican person speaking. Like he got the nuances and intonations of it right. I'm like, dude, I just admire your dedication. And in that moment it hit me that had I not created this podcast, this story, this idea would have never came my way. Like I would have never realized this, that people do these things sheerly out of love, right? And that just reaffirmed this idea of storytelling in me, like no, storytelling is important. And like it's these moments that make you feel worthy of doing it, right? And the more you, they will come to you in moments that you don't expect, but when they hit you, that's when you'll realize the power of storytelling, right? And that was a moment that it really reaffirmed to me that okay, this is why you do podcasting. It's like money part of it, all of it is one thing, right? Like it's business, that's important, but that's how you get to know people, and that's how you all these stories emerge, right? And that's what connects people. Because it's one thing, okay, like my podcast did this many numbers, or I'm working with this company, but you tell the story to any room, right? And it's just like both guys and girls, they both melt. It's like oh, this is too heartwarming, like we didn't expect this. And that's key for me, like that's important for me. It's like the storytelling element of it. And that was one moment as a producer where I felt like yes, this is why I do it, and this is why I'll continue to do it. And yeah, so that's one moment that stands out.
Such a cute story, actually. So, which future trends do you see shaping the future of podcasting? Is it video communications, AI assisted, or anything niche that is going to become a trend?
Yes. So AI definitely is going to, you know, influence the whole universe of podcasting in very significant way. uh, First of all, though, a lot of people will create clones of their voice, because this is something that you could do right now, right? Where for some reason, if you can't uh, be on the recording, and this is more on in the audio space, but the video will catch up soon. But at least on an audio level, what a lot of people are doing is that they are creating the clone of their voice. So they would say something, and AI has now, cloned your voice. So you can actually feed it a script, and it will say out those things in a narrative format, right? So in an interview format, you don't have to actually record your voice. You could just write the question, and your voice clone will just say that out. And because it's recorded, you can't tell whether it was a human or an AI, right? So a lot of people are doing that. So AI is going to significantly influence that. Also, like in video form now, because you have AI avatars, they are going to, take over, where they would have your likeness and your voice, but it won't be really you who's doing that. And so that is going to create a lot of this explosion of content, because they feel, a lot of people feel that, okay, I can have like 6 shows going on at the same time, and I just have to like type stuff, which again, you can go to chat gpt and like come up with a script or an idea. So again, a lot of content in terms of quantity will hit us, but then it's only the quality that will sustain. So that is like an initial curve that we will see, a lot more content, but it's not really quality content, and then it will eventually sort of normalize. Second, again, is like video podcasts are going to be more valuable than audio podcasts, because while audio podcasts, like that purist approach, has its own merits, people relate to you more when they look at you uh, in a video form, right? So they might not even look at the video as much if they know that it's a podcast. They might go about doing that day, like, so like cleaning the house, cooking stuff, whatever, going on a jog. Even though it's a video podcast, they might not listen to it. They might not watch it, but they'll still listen to it. So they'll be more valuable. They'll command higher price. And then the third thing is like the branded podcasts are going to become a thing. Like a more and more companies with their marketing divisions are going to think of ideas from a podcast first perspective to reach to younger generation, right? uh, and so in that sense, I think there is going to be like some of these key influential changes. But if anything, I just feel that that will make the podcasting space that much more interesting. So yeah, I think these are some of the trends that we will see, some of which are unfolding even right now as we speak.
Look, like what are some tools or platforms you recommend for distribution and production of like a podcast, like especially for Indian content creators?
um Indian content creators, I would still say that like Spotify and Apple Podcasts are like the two best platforms to go, because while they are based outside of India originally, they have good distribution system in terms of the markets that they function in. So if you go to Apple Podcast and select that the primary country of distribution is going to be India, you would then be ranked against Indian podcasts, right? If you choose US, then you will lose out to competition, because then they have a lot of companies there and a lot of production happening there. And then you might not, if you're starting out, let's say, you might not be able to match with that and be ranked very, like, below. But if you choose a specific market, then it's relative to that market that they will benchmark you against. So I would say in terms of distribution, Apple Podcasts and Spotify are great. Spotify, because they have such huge emphasis on podcasting, they also give you a lot of tools in terms of like running your own ads, or like, having your own editing pattern, and having, like, different ways you can experiment with how it shows up in the feed, right? So from a podcasting perspective, I think these are the two best platforms. In terms of production, uh, there is, of course, Riverside.fm, which is good,
Yeah.
because whether you can do audio or video, it's like great for that. And Yeah, I think so. These are some good platforms that you could use. I'm not naming more because we are not being sponsored by them. So
Okay.
I'll tell you offline which are the.
Okay. Can we do a quick rapid fire? I think it's showing we are 3 minutes and this limit will go off. Can we do a quick rapid fire?
Yeah, 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 sure.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Uh, so if you could give just one piece of advice to a new podcaster, what would it be?
Just keep recording.
Okay, podcast that you're currently hooked on.
There's one called the Happiness Project.
Oh,
It talks about the happiness and like what is the core essence of happiness, right? It's not in like money or friendship or like it's how you can build that and emerge that from yourself. Really good one. You should check it out.
definitely. S- one guest you dream of having.
Shahrukh Khan.
Wouldn't we all love to have him on a podcast? Editing or hosting, what do you love more?
Hosting.
One mistake new podcasters should avoid.
Um, Trying to over edit the content. It's okay to have some filler words. You don't need to sound robotic. So don't over edit your stuff.
I think that is something even we learned. We used to like focus on the minor, and we should there should be a delay in the rollout of our podcast. So then we realized to let it go. Like eventually, personally, how did you like sustain? Did you immediately get sponsorships and viewerships and all of that, and it helped you grow, or did you just stick to it because you love what you're doing?
I think so. Yeah. So there are two reasons that really helped, right? Like, first, it was like I was just lucky in terms of timing that there were these podcast platforms, right? Like, so Anchor as an app, it started as an app, but then it also had a marketplace for ads where essentially you could just say that, my podcast is open for sponsorship and they would connect you with different brands that they are looking to advertise on podcasts, right? And so in that sense the initial number of clients that I had or the brands that I worked with was purely because of the platform connecting me with them. And it was also good money in the starting because it was a new format, so you would have the CPM of like almost $25, right, which is a lot. Like I don't know how it works in India, but like $25 CPM is good money right? So it was that. And so that and the combination of like me just like holding people and saying like, hey, here's this podcast, you got to listen, I don't care. जब तक वो play register होता है ना, तुम 15 सेकंड सुन लो चलेगा. You could hate me for the rest of the life, that's fine. I just need like some plays from you, so listen to this. So that was a good thing because then like the more views you had, the more brands want to work with you, right?
Yeah.
So both are, but then of course to sustain it, right, only with brands it's not, because brand ka bhi they have their own cycles, right? Like when they invest externally and then when they don't. So it's based on business cycles. But of course, if you want to sustain it, so I think we started looking at the idea of branded podcasts like a lot more seriously once that sort of tapered off a little bit. Like brands are like, "Hey, "Nee, abhi 3-4 mahine tak we are good. I think we found our audience, so we are gonna market directly to them. We don't need you." So that's when it's like, "Acha, हाँ, chalo, where can you get big money out of podcasting?" So a lot of people, मतलब, they used to hit me up saying कि अच्छा ये podcast कैसे करें, हमको ये करना है हमारी कंपनी के लिए, उसके लिए. अरे मैं ही कर देता हूँ ना, मेरे को आता है. I'll just show you how to do it. I have my own crew. तुमको कैमरा पे चाहिए मैं वो लेके आ जाऊंगा, तुमको ऑडियो पे चाहिए मैं वो लेके आ जाऊंगा. So they were like, oh, we just pay you and just sit back and it will magically happen. I'm like, yeah, I have a team that will do it. So that really helped us a lot because उसमें if you, let's say, produce one season, okay, you're making somewhere between $50,000 to $60,000. तुम्हारा खर्चा हो रहा है 20 का पूरे सीजन का. So there is a huge margin that you could make. So अभी जो $40,000 मेरे बचे हैं, in that I can hire 2 people, right? So now I have one person who will make calls all day, just reaching out to companies saying like, hey, we have done this podcast, work with these brands. Would you like to have your own podcast? एक वो होता है, एक दूसरा है, it's more on the editing. So it's like, okay, the better editor you have, the faster you can get your stuff out, right? So that also keeps things moving. तो हाँ, मतलब it takes a while, but content wise, अगर if you just purely on content basis you want to make like big money, तो उसका तो यही होता है कि you have to sort of keep doing it gradually your sponsorships and your recognition will grow, and then you can do other things like just a live show ho gaya, you can sell tickets to that, and that has again like a huge margin. तो मतलब हॉल का निकाल के, क्रू का निकाल के, गेस्ट का निकाल के भी you have like lot more money left, and you can do VIP experiences, so like backstage meet and greet, and they don't have to be celebrities. Like जैसे कि career space में we would have someone who is vice president of product management at Google, और उसके लिए people would spend a lot of money because otherwise you don't have access to that person, right? But abhi they can pay, let's say, $500 and have like a 10-minute chat with that person. That might become a referral when they apply to the company, or that might give them more visibility. तो मतलब ये सब angles और tricks थोड़ा time लगता है figure out करने में. But once you have those, then you just go with that. With your podcast, I think it's great if you like do some more episodes and then try to do something where you can have like a live show. Again, I don't know the economics of your situation, so I can't like tell
Mhm.
कि किस time पे करना चाहिए. But if your podcast is named Healthy Naaris, and if you are inviting, people or experts in that space and holding a session, again, I'm not a Nari, I'm slightly healthy, so I cannot talk about like specific things, but I'm sure like, there are enough things like regarding women's health that you can bring people together on. So that would be good. Once that is on like video, then कि अच्छा okay, people are liking this, not liking this. You can build from that. But वैसे हाँ मतलब it takes थोड़ा सा time. You have to figure out कि मतलब क्या angle पे हम करें. But वो हो जाता है, like if you stay engaged,
Yeah.
तो it works.
Alok, like after how many podcasts do you start thinking of the business angle, or approaching ad sponsorships and everything?
Um, ऐसे कुछ हो मतलब इट रियली डिपेंड्स राइट, लाइक कि मतलब ऐसा कुछ सर्टेन नंबर ऑफ एपिसोड्स नहीं होते because some podcasts could do it on episode number 1, some podcasts can't do it even for episode
Yeah.
number 500, right? So it depends. जैसे कि मतलब if it's celebrity led kind of thing, तो तुम्हारे पहले दिन से ही स्पॉन्सर्स है. अगर तुम्हारा ये है कि if this is focused on daily news या current events, even at fifth and like 500th podcast episode be people are like nahi, this is, I can find this anywhere, why should I pay you specifically?
Mm.
So it depends on that. But I would say once you start seeing like higher averages generally कि मतलब हाँ views तो consistent किसी के भी नहीं रहते, no matter how much
Mm.
you market, ठीक है? But pick a period like 3 weeks, 4 weeks जो भी है, are you hitting higher averages every month? That's a good sign when you see that consistently for like 3-4 iterations कि मतलब हाँ 4-5 महीने से we are hitting higher averages. That's a good sign कि people are more and more people are tuning in, right? So that is when I would say कि you can start thinking of the business angle. It's like, hey, because any company, any brand, they like to see the upward momentum, right? उनको ये देखना है कि तुम, they don't really put a lot of emphasis on like the views or plays as much. They are really focused on are you hitting higher averages, right?
Okay.
उनको ये होता है कि with same money that we pay you, we are getting more and more audience potentially every week, right? That's good enough for them to justify that check, to say कि हाँ चलो, like we can pay you for that. And because again you're named Healthy Naris, you have like health angle and Naris angle, right? So there are enough companies and enough ideas that you can capitalize on that people would tune in consistently. So हाँ मतलब there's good potential on a lot of things.
A bit of problem that I think we are facing is because kind of India's podcast market is taken up. There are a couple of players, and I think they take majority of the chunk of the audience with them. So finding yourself in this niche, we just started. We're like what 10, 11 podcasts in right now, so it's very
Oh.
early. Yeah, so but yeah, finding yourself in this niche and even getting guests because of all the hoopla that happened a couple of weeks back with content creators and all that, people are a bit scared to come and open up on podcasts and stuff. So
Mhm.
there we are facing challenges that it's like we are not going to do anything incendiary, or we're not going to keep any edits that might put you in trouble or something like that.
Yeah, नहीं, and that's always going to be मतलब content moderation in India is a problem. It's a problem in the US as well, because like there's so much like political overtones to whatever your opinion.
Yeah, right now, yes.
Uh, but still, uh, what we used to do, क्योंकि क्या होता था कि sometimes we would book the studio, have the crew, guest will show up, something would happen in real world and they are like कि नहीं 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 अभी ऐसे नहीं बोल सकते, like I've said this on the podcast, तो ये हटा दो, वो हटा दो, and if you follow everything they say, then it's like कि अच्छा 1 घंटे का recording अभी 20 मिनट का हो गया है, and it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
So I used to have, I still do something called a release form, that is saying कि देखो, these are the questions, these are the topics, and this is what we are going to talk about. Okay. Only if they sign the form, you invite them to the podcast, right? Otherwise, you don't, because fair, your effort won't be worth it. And I know you guys are just starting out, so
Yeah.
that might not be very feasible. But at some point, matlab, that's the only way कि whatever people say, you can still release it, right? तो and it protects you also in a lot of ways. That's just saying कि मतलब ये जो recording पे बोला गया है, that's their responsibility. This is not our opinion and things like that. So they can't like put the spin on you and saying कि नहीं तुमने मुझे off camera बोला था कि ऐसा बोलना है, इसलिए मैंने बोल दिया. तो just to avoid that hassle and headache, मतलब वो है. But हाँ मतलब ये तो है कि building your audience takes a while. But एक second, you guys are only 11 episodes in, right? 11?
Yeah, yeah.
And you already
11.
sorry, हाँ, go ahead.
Released, I think 7 or 8.
Released, हाँ, ठीक है. But still, you have like what, 8,000 followers already? तो
Yeah.
ये तो अच्छा ही है यार. I've never had 8,000 followers on 10 episodes. Okay. So clearly you are doing good.
Reviews.
We had food reviews initially, so that's why.
Sorry, what?
We were doing food reviews initially, so we were reviewing restaurants and all those things for healthy options.
I see Santa Cruz and Bandra on your. Oh, Andheri West. That's where I live. Well, oh, nice.
So I'm based out of Santa Cruz, so we used to run around those places.
No, still it's good. Yeah. So this is nice, and like clearly your reels are good. So that is one thing, and and you have like what I can see just from the grid is like you have interesting people, right? Uh, तो मतलब it will continue to grow.
Yeah.
It takes a while,
Yeah, it
but
does.
if you keep at it, तो वो हो जाता है. It's not, consistency is the biggest thing. मतलब that's where most people feel very discouraged. मेरा तो ये था कि I just wanted to keep doing it, right? So it has to be enough low effort and low resources that I could do it. तो पहले आई यूज टू इन्वेस्ट लाइक $0 इन मार्केटिंग. मेरा ये था कि मैं ऑर्गेनिकली हर जगह पहुंच जाऊंगा, ठीक है, ट्विटर पे, फेसबुक पे, इंस्टाग्राम पे, लोगों के डीएम्स में मैं बस ऐसे ही डाल दूंगा कि सी देयर इज दिस न्यू पॉडकास्ट दैट आई न्यू एपिसोड केम आउट, राइट? तो आई थिंक अराउंड लाइक एपिसोड 120 123 के आसपास पीपल स्टार्टेड लाइक डूइंग ऑन देयर ओन, के मतलब मुझे फिर पकड़ के उनको बताने की जरूरत नहीं पड़ती थी. दे आर लाइक ओ this guy releases episodes every week and we get to see interesting people. So around that mark up, I started with audio and then I did video, and so there was like natural progression to that. But it's consistency is the thing. So if it is something that you could do consistently, so eventually it will all pay off. A lot of people को लगता है कि अरे it doesn't make sense. मैं I've been doing it for 6 months, 8 months, year and a half. अभी भी कुछ I've not made like something big out of it, right? But if you keep doing that, right, eventually your competition at some point will either get absorbed or like they will focus on something else, जो भी है, and then you will become sort of the recognizable face of that, right? तो वो then the whole return will come. फिर मतलब जितना 1.5 साल 2 साल में नहीं कमाया वो फिर 2-3 महीने में आ जाएगा, right? Because now suddenly you have attention of the brands and the community and you are being singled out as the next player after whoever is like gobbling up the money and resources right now leaves or like focuses on something else. तो वही होता है. So eventually the market will reward, but वो दैट इज डिफरेंट फॉर डिफरेंट पीपल, राइट? लाइक कुछ लोगों को 1-1.5 साल लगता है, कुछ लोगों को 5 साल लगते हैं, कुछ लोगों को 2 महीने लगते हैं. The only way to figure out is to actually do it, right?
Yeah.
तो बस वही है. So consistency is the name of the game. If you're consistent, eventually it will pay off.
Thank you for all your insights, Aalok. This is
हाँ.
like really fun podcast for us. So
Yeah, yeah.
take your consider what you said into consideration. Consistencies.
हाँ, मतलब if you guys need, like, if you have some questions, or if you're like wondering about something, अच्छा, like, hey, we are thinking of this, what do you think? तो मतलब happy to offer my 2 cents on that. But इंडिया में, हाँ, podcasting is growing. So इंडिया में branded
Yeah.
podcast बहुत कम होते हैं अभी. Like, it's growing, but that's one thing that, like, makes me like stop from going back to New York. It's like, yeah, there's so much opportunity here. I have already a proven business model in the US. If I just replicate that here, then, like, you could like make good money, I'm thinking. अभी मैंने टेस्ट नहीं किया, but let's see. But we'll figure out. Let's see. I'll let you know if that ever happens, right? But that would be interesting. India में branded podcast companies बहुत कम है.
Very less, but trust me, as an entrepreneur, also. So podcast is a way to get direct marketing. So that was our thought process, and this was not an end goal. This is a way to achieve a goal, basically. Like, this is a direct marketing platform, and the same idea was replicated by a lot of other guests that we had on board also, and
Yeah.
they wanted to start their own businesses, and they were like, no, first we'll start with podcasting, then we'll launch a product. So like we figured we are on the right path. Is that we kind of tapped into it a bit earlier, and a lot of people are trying to enter the space, and then we found we did a deep dive into the world of podcasting in itself, and we realized it's like an untapped potential with podcasting as a metric also. So if you're thinking of in terms of if you're going to pitch an investor, if you're not thinking about, "Hey, this is my platform," you're saying, okay, this is my business. So that was very interesting for us, and we know it is lucrative. We just want to like do justice, like if you're going in the right path, or if there's some changes to be made, or what can we do different. So that those are the nicks that we're trying to figure out. But we know, like, this model works. Like it's like we're sitting on a gold mine. So it's just we just need to figure out like how do you tweak it.
Yeah, no, that's very tempting. Like, now it makes me feel like, I just hire a bunch of managers in the US. कि यार देखो तुम न्यूयॉर्क का देख लो, मैं इंडिया में भी build कर. It's true. It's a very untapped market right now, and
Yeah,
it's growing very quickly.
very.
That's the only podcast. Like, podcast is the only media platform that is actually growing. Everything else is like pretty much plateaued out. मतलब ऊपर नीचे थोड़ा होता है, but it's not like moving anything. Podcasting is great in that sense. So yeah, it'll be nice.
We have launched a workshop, like online and offline workshops we are doing.
Mhm.
So we would love to have you in an online workshop, like, maybe on podcasting, like how to make a successful podcast or something, like for our audience, if you are interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. And the good thing is that I have something similar to that we pitch to the companies, right? Like, where, like, we explain them कि हाँ, pre-production, production, and post-production. These are the 3 phases. हर एक phase में क्या activities होती है, and then how we are the people to do it for you. But I can modify that to kind of like, your audience, and say that, okay, if you're just starting out with like zero budget, this is what you do. If you have some budget, this is what you do. If you have a lot of budget, then you invite me to your podcast and give me good money for an hour. So nahi, I would be happy to do that. So let me know, and I'll send you that deck to you in advance, so you know कि मतलब audience को क्या जा रहा है, right?
Thank you so much, Alok. We'll keep in touch.
Yeah.
Hopefully, like you tried to explore the podcast market in India, and somewhere we can integrate or something. That will be really fun.
Yeah, no. Trust me, I've been researching. There are a bunch of people in my company that are trying to come up with like women's health podcast. But again, it's
We are right here.
yeah. And but in US, it's such a divisive topic, right? Like,
Yeah.
if you like generally, right? Like, even if you talk about something regular, like, women getting their periods, that is like such hotly debated, and like, I'm like, ठीक है, why not everything needs to be like, politicized and all of that. Like,
Yeah.
there are pro-feminists, anti-feminists. Like, we are just talking about health. Like, it doesn't need to be this serious, right? तो वहाँ पे थोड़ा it's a messy thing,
In
but
India, it's totally opposite because it doesn't get discussed enough.
Actually,
yeah.
It doesn't get discussed enough, and even when we invite people from a health perspective, we're talking, we're like, okay, this was not tapered for women, or this research or this thought process, this medicine was not tapered for women. Why is that? So yeah, India, it's like,
so
why are
actually, we released an episode for pole dancing, like pole dancing is sexualized in India, and there
Mhm.
were a lot of bad comments we received, like from Indian people. So we understood that the market, like people are not that, they don't have that kind of mindset to
yeah,
accept.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why you're tight, like walking a tightrope in terms of like
yes,
how do you present the optics of it, right?
yes,
And I was in London like few weeks ago, and my friend regular, she's a textile designer at a company, and she goes to pole dancing just for fun. It's like it's good for my thighs. I enjoy it. तो उसके लिए मैं जाती हूँ. I get tired playing tennis or anything. So this is what I do. So yes, the origins of it might make you think, अच्छा चलो, women are dressed this way and they are doing these things. But context really matters. If it's just a fun activity for someone to do it, like it shouldn't be considered a tape.
yeah,
But वो है, we'll get into it as we speak more. But हाँ नहीं, that's something that we are thinking also from our standpoint कि like how do we approach that. But we'll talk more about it.
done, done. Thank you so much for your time. Sorry to keep you waiting.
No, no, it's fine. It's Sunday. I'm free. And sorry about last time. Like I just received a meeting request from my manager on my way home. I'm like, अभी ये नहीं मानेगा. मैं इसको if I tell him I can't do it, so he'll be like, अच्छा नहीं, you'll have to work weekend. ये वो like. Might as well I'll talk to you guys. So thank you for accommodating me.
No problem. No. Thank you so much, Alok. We had so much fun today, and thank you for delving deep into the world of podcasting and giving us so much nuggets to take away from. And we would love to have your further inputs on how, if any of our listeners or anybody, or even us, if we want to get into audio podcasting, how to go about it.
Yeah, 100%. I am happy to help anyone who wants to be in the space of podcasting. And yeah, thank you so much for like considering me worthy of your podcast and inviting me. I had great fun, and I hope you did as well.
Yes.
Yeah, really great insights. Thank you so much.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you.